and gentlemen, in introducing my original invention, the water torture cell, although there is nothing supernatural about it, I am willing to forfeit the sum of $1,000 to anyone who can prove that it is possible to obtain air inside of the torture cell when I'm locked up in it in the regulation manner after it has been filled with water. Should anything go wrong when I'm locked up, one of my assistants walks to the curtain, ready to rush in, demolishing the glass, allowing the water to flow out in order to save my life. Harry Houdini, October the 29th, 1914, Flatbush, New York.
You're listening to the Escapart Podcast. My name is Stuart Burrell, and thank you for listening. Why start off a podcast with Harry Houdini issuing a challenge? Well, it seems to fit because the Escapart Podcast talk about escapology as well as strength and other things, but it also highlights one of the reoccurring issues with escapology. We keep referencing the man himself, Harry Houdini, Eric Weiss. Many things to many people, a divisive figure sometimes for the magic community, but also inspiration for so many others. And this is the point. This is why I'm recording this podcast. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing, because Harry has become a touchstone, and he is the metaphor that we use to explain who we are and what we do. The word escapology, or escapologist, was originally created years after Harry Houdini died, and yet if you ask anyone to name an escapologist, the majority of people would name Harry Houdini. And here is the thing, he has become the example. If we pause for a second, if I ask you to name a famous racing driver, depending where you are in the world, you could say Alain Prost, you could say Ayrton Senna, you could say Nigel Mansell, perhaps Lewis Hamilton, Michael Schumacher, Sebastian Vettel. You're not likely to say Mike Hawthorn, yet Mike Hawthorn was equally a successful racing driver. It's unlikely you're going to say Juan Manuel Fangio, although he is a legend. And this is the thing, if I say name a professional wrestler, you're likely to say Hulk Hogan, or if you're in the UK of a certain age, you might say Shirley Crabtree, who used to wrestle as Big Daddy. You're not likely going to pick Mick Foley, or Owen Hart, or Davey Boy Smith. All of these are incredibly talented people. However, unless you have an intricate awareness of the art form, their involvement, their professionalism, their capabilities, their skills are not recognised, and this is the problem. Escapology and escapologists are practising with great flair and great dexterity today, and at the same quality and quantity that they did in the 1930s to 1920s when Houdini was in his prime. But because Harry Houdini made an impact, because he recorded so much, because so much remained in the public domain, he has become the touchstone. Name a famous footballer, name a famous golfer, name a famous politician. Chances are people will pick the same reoccurring names. And here is the quandary. How do we move escapology forward when all anyone ever really wants to talk about is how you relate to Harry Houdini? And this is how some people have done it. Some escape artists go out of their way to distance themselves from Houdini. They say Harry Houdini was alive at this time, now he isn't, and they proceed from this point. Others reference Harry maybe once or twice and use that to make it clear to the audience that they are watching something new, something vibrant, something fresh. And that works very well in certain contexts. The issue is that when you're trying to explain what an escape artist is, when you're trying to explain what it is an escape artist does, you find yourself having to reference examples. And not everyone has heard of Norman Bigelow, not everyone has heard of Steve Baker, not everyone has heard of David Straitjacket, or Nick Jansen, or David Duval. As a result, you find people referencing magicians, Paul Daniels, David Blaine, David Copperfield. The list is actually quite long of people who are referenced in terms of the escapology and the illusions they perform, even when they're actually mainly more mainstream magicians. And this is a quandary. We find ourselves coming back to Houdini as the point of reference, even when we try and distance ourselves from his work. This is not to say his work isn't good and shouldn't be applauded. It's purely that constantly referencing Harry Houdini is a bit like constantly referencing Emperor Palpatine in Star Wars. After a while, you do actually want to focus on what Luke and Leia and Han are doing. And this is the thing. How do we move forward? The media likes referencing Houdini because his work is actually out of copyright. His work is public domain. It is free. As a result, you don't have to pay a royalty for its use. The track we heard at the very start was recorded in 1914. It is in public domain. It can be used by anybody. And just to reference that point, I'm going to play it again.
Ladies and gentlemen, in introducing my original invention, the water torture cell, although there is nothing supernatural about it, I am willing to forfeit the sum of $1,000 to anyone who can prove that it is possible to obtain air inside of the torture cell when I'm locked up in it in the regulation manner after it has been filled with water. Should anything go wrong when I'm locked up, one of my assistants walks through the curtain, ready to rush in, demolishing the glass, allowing the water to flow out in order to save my life. Harry Houdini, October the 29th, 1914, Flatbush, New York.
Houdini has actually set out a number of interesting challenges in that one recording, which was recording on an early Edison wax cylinder. And this shows why we remember Houdini so much. He was publicised. He was the first man to really develop spin doctoring. He would send out press releases. He would ensure that the hype was in every single town he visited because it helped drum up sales. It helped him guarantee his place on the bill. The problem with it is that because of his work and his release of information and its now ease of access, other contemporaries of his aren't referenced as much due to his fame. In the same way as we see modern celebrity, we see other talents not being seen, and that has caused a problem. If you want an example and you're not familiar with escapology in that detail, take a look at 1980s wrestling in America. You have a phenomenal superstar created in the form of Hulk Hogan. However, in some of the matches, it's the other wrestlers. It's the Roddy Pipers. It's the Randy Savages. It's the Andre the Giants who help lift the performance to a level that makes it enjoyable for the audience. And the reason for that is because they're there. It's a talent relationship. But in terms of escapology, you're on stage, perhaps with a helper, perhaps with an assistant, but you're dealing with an inanimate object. So you need to make the inanimate object the point of contention. You need to make the inanimate object the thing that you must defeat. And not Houdini was very good at that, but so are others. And there's a classic example, which I'm going to give you now. Bowell Walker was a contemporary of Houdini's, and on more than one occasion appeared at theatres a couple of weeks or months either before or after the man himself. Val was very good at convincing the audience about the risk and the threat that the challenge posed. And these challenges would be brought in by members of the public. He would ensure that the local locksmith, the local blacksmith, the local creative artist or genius had been given enough notice to prepare a unique challenge, and that the local media was aware of it. He was effectively doing exactly the same things that Houdini was doing, but unlike Harry successfully did later in his career, Val wasn't able to transfer to Hollywood, and perhaps it is that fact that has limited the development of escapologists post-Houdini. Val was challenged by a local creative person, a John Ball, who had made a special straitjacket. This straitjacket was designed to be inescapable. Most people escape from straitjackets as part of a comedy routine or as part of a general escape. This was a brutal device. It was impossible. Your arms were strapped in 8 different places. It was effectively impossible. Somehow, Val Walker was able to free himself eventually, but in doing so created a myth and a legend, because immediately afterwards he destroyed the straitjacket, not out of spite, but because he had won it fair and square, under the rules, under the terms of the challenge. The thing was that John Ball then proceeded to sue him for criminal damage, even though he no longer actually owned the jacket. That is why it's remembered, because it's part of court documents. And it is the legacy of escape artists that we have to record what we do. We have to find a way of ensuring that what we do outlives our time on stage, our time in academia. Wherever we are, we need to record what we do, which is partly why you have got this podcast. For better or worse, richer or poorer, this is what I am doing it for. So please bear with me. The other thing you'll notice is it's important that when you do issue a challenge, that you make sure you can't possibly lose. There have been many an occasion, even Houdini got caught. An example of this took place in the UK, where Houdini was challenged at the Tetley Brewery, and he actually passed out in the cylinder he was attempting to escape from. Equally, Houdini was actually very nearly trapped and stuck in the weed tyre escape. He was wrapped in snow chains. There are also other examples where he attempted escapes that he had to be reset in. He escaped from them, but only after cramp had set in. And this is the thing. There are many examples where people have assessed everything and things have gone wrong, sometimes fatally. But this leads us back to the very first thing you heard apart from the guitar intro, and that is Houdini issuing a challenge for $1,000 or $25,000 in today's money. He was saying, I challenge anyone to prove that I can get air at the bottom of the water torture cell. And we now know, having looked at the original device, having looked at the plans, having studied it, having recreated it, that he could say that in the full knowledge he would never have to part with $1,000, because it is absolutely impossible to get air in the water torture cell when it's filled with water and you're locked in it in the regulation manner. So for 2 minutes on an Edison recording, he was able to lay out a series of terms and references that guaranteed people would think and look and study and be aware of his craft and his creation. But he also knew that no one could possibly ever challenge him and win. And that is the secret of a challenge escape. That, and having the skill to pull it off. Thank you for listening. This has been the Escapart Podcast. This is episode 1. Episode 2 will be focusing on strength, and a bit later on we'll be talking about world records and breaking them. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time. I've been Stuart Barrell.